King's College Hospital update, and we're going to hear from them in terms of their financial position and staffing, retention and recruitment. Then there's an item on the Better Care Fund, and then there's an item on public health priorities. I'm proposing that we take them in that order.
Yeah.
And in which case I'm going to hand over to David, and I'm going to go and sit by Elizabeth.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. Okay, so we're going to take item 5, which is the King's College Hospital update, and we're going to take, as the Chair indicated, 2 items. The first is the Trust's plans to improve KCH's financial position. And I believe we've got Alan Goldsman, who I think is the Acting Chief Financial Officer, and Sarah Middleton. So I don't know if you wish to both come forward.
Yeah, what would you like to say?
I think if you can sit over there and reserve seats. If you don't mind just introducing yourselves again, just for the record. Oh, okay. Where should she sit? She might just sit there.
I'm really happy to sit up here from the CCG as well.
Yeah, yes, that's fine. So if you could just introduce yourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you. My name is Alan Goldsman. I'm the Interim Chief Financial Officer at King's College Hospital NHS Foundation Trust. Thank you for inviting us to come along tonight. I'm happy to give a brief presentation and take questions around the current financial position for King's.
Okay. Does everyone else just want to introduce themselves, and then we'll...
I'm Sarah Middleton. I'm the Stakeholder Relations at King's.
And I'm Caroline Gilmartin. I'm the Director of Integrated Commissioning for Southwark CCG, and Southwark CCG is the lead commissioner for King's.
Okay. How long is your presentation, roughly?
3 or 4 minutes.
Okay, no, that's fine. If you want to do your introduction, then we'll take some questions.
Fine. Well, I think you've got a small note in your pack, and we can just sort of talk through the headlines really, and perhaps just use this as an opportunity to ask some questions as a result of that. So just going to the note. I think the first point to make is that.
Sorry, can I just check the members? Members should have one of these.
And then there's spare ones over there.
Sorry.
I will talk to the note, so probably.
Yeah, it's not in your agenda. It's only the one further.
You won't miss it. You won't miss it. Yeah. So King's has been very challenged in terms of its financial position for several years now. Your note says that at the end of the financial year in 2015-16, the Trust ended up at the end of the year with a £78.2 million deficit. In order to achieve that result, it needed and did deliver a savings program, a cost improvement program of £86 million in order to get to that number. In the following year, King's was able to reduce that deficit further to £48.7 million, again on the back of a very substantial £92 million savings program. So coming into this year then, 2017-18, our plan deficit was for a further improvement of that position down to £38.8 million with the £66 million CIP program. So you can see how some very large deficit numbers, albeit on the back of an organisation whose turnover is about approximately £1.1 billion, really requires a very substantial year-on-year improvement in the underlying productivity and sort of cost base of the organisation. So it's progressing in the right direction. This year has been particularly challenged, and I think it's fair to say that we're looking to achieve something like a £66 million CIP cost improvement program. We look to be on track to deliver about £60 million of that, but there are very substantial pressures on us throughout the whole health economy and in particular at King's in terms of our performance, and we do not look like, in fact we won't hit our plan this year. The current position at month 7, so at the end of October, is a deficit of £63 million, so we're already, I'm afraid, quite substantially ahead of our plan. It's not increasing at the same rate, and we hope that the cost improvement program will kick in over the remainder of the year, but nevertheless, we think the likely outturn for this year is about a £70 million deficit. So we're maintaining the pressure on our cost base and making sure that we can deliver the savings programs and the productivity we need, but in fact it's becoming more and more difficult overall to live within our means, both in terms of our income, but also in terms of our costs of our operation. There's a substantial pressure on us when we do that. We have a capital program. This is not on your notes, but just to say that we also have a substantial capital program, something like 67, just under 68 million pounds of capital spend, roughly divided. Probably about half of that goes towards estate costs, in particular a major new critical care development, which is nearing completion on the Denmark Hill site, but also funding for ICT, computer technologies and equipment as well. So there's a substantial program there, which we're also developing and having funding for the remainder of this year. So I'll pause there. I think that's just the headlines, really, in terms of that position. That's the note that you had. I'd be happy to take any other questions.
Just before we take questions, can I just ask you, are you able to put your deficit in how it compares to other trusts? I know obviously trusts vary in size, but do you have any sense of how that would compare to other comparable trusts in London?
It's substantial.
You're at the higher end.
We're at the higher end. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, our turnover is 1.1 billion, so let's understand that. But by value, this is one of the larger ones, I would say, in London. As a percentage, it may not be, but it is a very substantial deficit and higher than most.
Okay. I've got just one question, and I'll take members' question. Obviously, you have foundation trust status, don't you?
Yes.
My understanding that foundation trusts weren't allowed to have deficits. So, how does that work? Is there any penalty for that?
We have to. So we there's no other source of funding for a deficit, so we have to borrow the money. So we're in receipt of very substantial amounts of what's called distressed finance in order to maintain that position. So we have a deficit, but it's a funded deficit in that sense. But of course, it's just increasing borrowing as part of that process.
And where do you borrow from?
On the NHS financing facility. So it's effectively treasury money, but through a financing facility. It's not we could borrow commercially, but we don't. We borrow through that facility. It's a lower cost.
Okay. Do any members have questions?
Just two more questions.
2 more questions?
You took my question.
Oh, sorry. Anybody else?
Yeah.
No.
Okay. Yes.
Excellent.
Yeah. You mentioned that you had to borrow to finance the deficit.
Yes.
Okay. Now, my understanding is, if you're going to borrow for consumption, which I believe it is, which is not going to yield any return, then I'm worried that how are you going to bring the finances back online? Unless you perhaps maybe you sell some of your assets or.
Yeah. So shall I take that question first and then?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So what we need to do, what we need to be able to demonstrate to our regulators, is that over time, over a number of years, we can repay that. So if we can't do it in 1 year, we've got to deliver productivity for longer, such that over, say, a 3-year period, we can in fact do that. So taking 1 year with another, and over a 3-year period, we should be able to do that. Can I just respond to your point about selling assets? Because of course.
Of course, I just wanted the option.
Well, as a foundation trust, there's a lock on assets, so we can't simply sell assets to pay off our loans. We'd have to go through a substantial sort of transaction process, consultation, and that sort of thing. So this is not. These assets are not mortgaged by the loans. The loans are, if you like, an overdraft or working capital. They are not a mortgage on assets, perhaps as it might be on your home or something like that. So we can't secure the assets. The assets are not affected or encumbered in any way by that.
Yeah, if I could just ask you a follow-up question. I mean, simple arithmetic, isn't it? If I'm spending more than what I'm getting in, obviously I have to find the money somewhere. Yes. So you've been spending more than you have.
Yes.
So therefore, how are you going to reduce the deficit if no money is coming in, unless government is prepared to fill the gap?
Yeah. I probably won't give you a very full answer, but just remember that we get £1.1 billion a year of funding, and that funding has been going up. Actually, we get more money each year. Unfortunately, the costs are going up at a greater rate, and we've not been able to improve our productivity at the same rate. So it's partly an issue about funding, but for the most part, under the national regime, we've got the funding that's appropriate for us in terms of the activities we deliver. But I think the real challenge for us is to live within the cost envelope that enables us to be able to deliver that, and that's very challenging. I think the other way to think about this is that, of course, King's is part of a health system, and we are a number of patient pathways. We have, for example, a major trauma centre. We have a number of major specialties where King's provides a regional, if not national, service. So I think although King's has and its board has a responsibility to live within its means as part of this, I think we are working very closely with colleagues in commissioning and elsewhere through our regulators to make sure that we can operate and function in that system. So I think part of the system, part of the solution to the King's improving its position is entirely within the gift of King's and its board and its costs, and part of it is how we work together across health systems in order to be able to kind of improve the productivity, improve the way in which services are delivered, so that we can do that more efficiently and more effectively. So it's a sort of it's a multi faceted sort of response.
Yeah, I do understand, but that still hasn't answered the question of the deficit, which is still there. Either you cut down on the number of staff and other things in order to make some savings, in order to pay some deficit, to bridge the deficit. Obviously, you have to find a way, because you are not selling services to the public. That actually generates income, if I understand it correctly. So therefore, if you rely on the money that is coming from the government in form of grants, whatever, then with this huge deficit, over the, I don't know how many years you want to spread over, still you have to make some savings anywhere and somewhere in order for you to be able to bridge the gap.
Yeah. So I don't want to get into, well, I'm very happy to address this in any amount of detail you want.
I'm not looking for detail.
No, we don't get a block grant actually for the most part. We get paid for the number of patients we treat. So the money follows the patient. I mentioned the regional and national specialties. So if we don't treat or care for a patient, in most cases, we don't get paid. Therefore, there's no ability to kind of cut services in order to save money, because if we don't do something, we don't get paid. So the real challenge is the productivity, avoiding waste, avoiding making sure that we kind of right size what we do, working, utilizing all our assets, to their best extent. So it's a productivity challenge. It's not about cuts or anything like that in terms of.
Do you not have some private patients though, to bring some money in? Do they bring money?
We do have some private patients. It's relatively modest at King's. That could present an opportunity. However, our capacity is incredibly challenged in terms of NHS patients. So if we have any spare capacity, we can use that and we can make a profit in order to subsidise the NHS patient. But when we come under extreme pressure in terms of patients coming through doors, then unfortunately it tends to have the opposite effect. Our private capacity tends to get overtaken to some extent by NHS patients. But we do try to, where possible, generate returns on commercial activities. I mean, research might be a good example of that, where we do commercial, research for pharmaceutical companies and so forth, and we can make not substantial margins, but we can actually make a contribution to that more widely. So there are opportunities to generate income, at a margin from non-NHS sources that does help.
Okay. Do you want to add a point? Yeah.
Just to add to that, I think that I would really not want to lose the system point that Alan has made. It's incredibly important that we see and ensure that other parts of the system are working with King's in order to assist both a transfer of care to the most appropriate place for somebody to be cared for, but actually also to kind of, make sure that the right filters are there about the people that are coming in. So I think there is a lot of work to do. There's also, and I recognise that sustainability and transformation funds are not necessarily the most favourite flavour of the month for councils, but there are some real opportunities in terms of how you align acute care across a greater population to drive out some of the productivities that Alan's talking about as well. So I do think there is, everybody has got some substantial skin in the game here, really, to actually address this as an issue.
Okay, Councillor Pollock.
Okay. I don't know actually for my question if there's going to be more on retention and recruitment in other presentations.
Yeah,
might somehow kind of links to assets and that as well. So I might defer to that.
Yeah. So, Councillor Dennis.
Thank you. So it was just a reflection on the figures looking back over the last few years. So you have been able, between the last couple of years, to make some inroads into the deficit with a substantial savings programme, and yet this financial year we've kind of swung the pendulum back again and we've got an increasing deficit. So I just wondered if you could explain the challenges around that. So both how, I suppose the difference, so how you were able to make some substantial savings between 2015-16 and 16-17, but why then have we kind of hit a point where the savings that could be made have been made, and now it's just an increasing struggle, I suppose. And I suppose a leading question: are there savings? Again, £92 million in savings over the last financial year. Are there things that were actually cut which are actually now proving more expensive to deal with in other ways? I don't know if that makes sense to the question.
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. I mean, I think actually partly you're right. The more you do, I mean, these are very, very substantial savings improvement programs. I think the further you go, the less you've got to get, really. Having said that, there are good benchmarks out there that we can use, and I think we need to keep on challenging ourselves on that. So I'm not saying by any means we're there, but I think you're right. Part of the challenge this year has been the fact that we've been working at this at a substantial level for some time. So I think that's partly beneficial. But no, I think we'll talk a little bit about staffing costs and those kind of things. But I think the service pressure in our organisation is becoming more and more. I think the requirement to sort of staff up to meet demand, I think, is there. There are a whole host of other factors that are sort of part of the world that we're operating in at the moment that do mean that the pressure on our costs is increasing. One example of that might be in the supply of drugs and this kind of thing. We're having some challenges at the moment with global drug shortages, and we need to sometimes substitute perhaps our most desirable and best price drugs for some that are more expensive. They're still safe for patients, of course, but we are under pressure from the wider world as part of that process. I'm sure we'll talk about some of the cost pressures on our staff and so forth and that kind of thing. So yeah, I think it's you're right to point out that life is getting tougher. I think it's partly to do with what we've achieved in the past, but I think it's partly to do with the fact that there are a lot of challenges on us at the moment in terms of managing our costs.
Can I just follow up? So, and this is probably something I should know already, but when do you set what's your budget setting process, and in terms of a cost improvement programme for 2018-19, when do you set those?
We're doing that right now. No, we start. So our financial year runs from April to March. We sit down with our board. In fact, this morning in our private board we discussed sort of the parameters of what was sensible to work with this year. Obviously, we work very closely with commissioners of services, because ultimately at the end of the day, they are the payers. So we need to work with them in terms of estimating demand growth and that kind of thing. So yeah, now's the time to start doing that. I think the good news for us for this year, in one sense, to make it a bit easier, is that we did a lot of work at the end of at this time last year to deliver 2-year contracts and settlements. So that's made life a little bit easier, and we've got some certainty about what's available to us. I think the challenge, therefore, is to make sure we can, deliver the productivity gains, deliver within that sort of overall sum. So, but we're starting that, literally starting that, this week, and we'd hope to complete that before we start trading next year.
I've just got 2 final quick questions. One's for Caroline and one's for yourself. In regards to you said the projected deficit was about 70 million.
Yeah.
To what extent does that, so obviously there's been some suggestions that this might be a difficult winter, particularly in relation to things like flu. Does that have some allowance for that, or not? That's the case, maybe.
It's very hard to say. So we tried to think of as many things as we can. So I think it's early in the process. I'd like to think that that's a sort of an all-encompassing forecast, which has some indications of what might happen over winter. But I think it's difficult to give you as elsewhere. I mean, yes is the practical answer, but we'll have to see what happens over the winter. Really. It will be very demanding to hit that number, I think. Let's just say that, given where we're at the moment.
And my question for Caroline is, so how does this, if at all, impact on the CCG and the fact that Kings have got this big deficit? Does it cause you and the CCG any issues?
Anxiety.
Sleepless nights.
I think that
financially, though, is there any impact financially on the CCG or
so
not?
potentially there is financial impact on the CCG, because obviously we wish to work with colleagues in a way that actually helps them through their financial difficulties. It's not in our interest, certainly not in the interest of anybody that lives in Southwark, to have a trust that is failing and unable to employ doctors, nurses, whatever it is that is needed. But I think we have a close and robust relationship, I think we would say, and what we seek to do is to set a good enough contract which will actually soak up, so specifically from the Southwark viewpoint, soak up Southwark activity, and I think we've done that, and we've done that in terms of actually both projecting the activity that we require for the population, but also being clear about where there are areas of pressure and where there are opportunities or requirements to put in extra funding in order to be able to smooth pathways
there's no pressure for us to find extra money to help them with their
deficit. So there's no direct pressure for us to find extra money. I think that the issue comes, and actually we have to work, and we are working across the SDP in that way at the moment. I think the issue comes when something really big crops up, and that might be something like a winter that is intolerable, in which case we will need to look to every kind of part of the system in order to support that, because hospitals can't fail. They can't fail, and they mustn't fail, and we mustn't make the mistakes of Mid-Staffordshire ever again in the NHS. So we're not being asked to look, but we are being asked to work incredibly hard, and we do that. And I think that, Alan, you would support the fact that we do that in terms of
very much so.
And are you able to say what sort of percentage of your business is Southwark's business?
Well, so
Kings.
So a third of our business is Lambeth, Southwark, and Bromley, and about a third of it's probably a little bit less than a third for Southwark, I suspect.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think Bromley's probably our biggest contract actually because of the process role. So it's probably about 10%, something like that.
Okay.
I'd have to. If you need a precise answer, I'll
10%.
come back.
As long as that's fairly accurate.
Not speculate.
We have an appreciation of the level of dialogue that we have with our colleagues at Kings, given the level of money that we actually pay you.
I think just to reiterate that, I think the trust does have a really good, strong, healthy, constructive relationship particularly with its local CCGs, and I absolutely endorse that. I think we have a very supportive relationship, albeit challenging. And I think we do talk to each other a lot,
We do.
challenge one another a lot as part of that process, but in a constructive and healthy way. And I think that's a very good dialogue. I mean, in year, by the way, just in terms of the King's position, we do agree a sort of a fixed sum actually. So there's no, in any one financial year, there's no further pressure other than what the CCG might accept to ask for more money in the year. That's covered off in what they call a block contract. Of course, it does have implications going forward if that's driven by demand growth and so forth. But I think actually our relationship with particularly Lambeth and Southwark, I think, is a very healthy one, and really I don't think we cause you any direct pressure on that. I think our real issues are probably with some of our national specialist services rather than local ones particularly.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much for attending. We're going to now invite your colleagues to come up. So the second item we're going to look at is staffing, retention, recruitment plans for King's College Hospital. And this time I believe we have Dawn Broderick and Peter Absalom.